You've got a new camera, or you're thinking of getting a new camera, or maybe you had a camera for a while. In any case, it's probably a good camera, and if you're struggling getting a good exposure, it's not because of the camera, it's because of the settings you're using. So in today's video we will see what shooting modes are and what is best to use in different scenarios. Stay till the end and I will show you the mode I use all the time to get photos like this, and this. I will try to stay under 5 minutes. I cannot promise anything, but let's try. If you are new to the channel, I publish weekly content where I share everything I learned in more than 10 years working as a professional nature and wildlife photographer. So subscribe if you wanna see more. So, here is our camera and the modes that I can find are P, TV, AV, M. In some other cameras, the TV mode might also be called S mode and the AV might be called A, but these are the main shooting modes that you will find in any camera of any brand. So let's start with P. What is P? Is program. In program mode, you can choose the ISO of the camera while the camera controls aperture and shutter speed. If you're not sure what are these three settings, go and watch the video I made about photography basics, but make sure you come back. So back to our program mode. We said that we control ISO and the camera decides the aperture and shutter speed settings. I don't like this at all because both aperture and shutter speed are controlling the look of my image and I want to be in charge of that and not the camera, so I will never ever use P mode. Let's go to the next one, is TV or S in some other cameras, and this is the shutter priority auto exposure. In this case I will set the shutter speed and the ISO value and the camera is setting the aperture and is using the aperture to control the exposure of my image. This gives us a bit more control over our image, but still aperture is affecting very heavily the look of the image. The smaller the aperture, the more depth of field we have, the more of our image will be in focus. The wider the aperture, the less the image will be in focus, meaning we only have the subject in focus. So if, for example, we are going for that look where only the subject is in focus and everything else is out of focus, we don't want the camera to close down the aperture because there is too much light. Shutter priority might be useful, but again, I will not use it because I want to control my aperture and I want to make sure it is where I want it to be. Third one is AV or A mode. This is aperture priority. And here things start to be more interesting. Aperture priority means I can set the ISO and the aperture of my camera, and the camera will automatically select the correct shutter speed so that the exposure is right. This can work very well in a lot of different situations when we have variable light conditions, cloudy sky for example, clouds moving, and we don't want to be in full manual mode, always changing the settings. I use it a lot for my commercial work when I'm shooting people that are not doing anything super fast, but there is still a problem also with aperture priority, and is that if the light goes down too much and maybe we get a cloud between us and the sun, the shutter speed will drop to a very slow value, and if we are dealing with a static subject, that is not a problem. But if we are shooting something like a bird or an animal or an athlete that is running, we don't want to run the risk of a slow shutter speed that will result in a blurred subject. For those unpredictable situations like wildlife photography, we want to be in control of every single setting of the camera to make sure we get to the look we want. Let's see, the last mode we have is manual mode, and this means we set ISO, shutter speed and aperture manually. Here we finally have the full control of our settings. But again, we have a problem. To change any one of these settings, we have to manually dial in the value using either 1, 2, or 3, one of these 3 dials that we have on the camera. For example, I might spot a subject here on my left, and I'm shooting in this direction and the sun is on my back, so the subject is front lit, and then this antelope starts running around and I want to track it, and if it goes on my right side, the condition will change from being front lit to be completely backlit. If I keep the same settings during this change, I will for sure end up with some blown out photos or super dark photos. Something will be wrong. So the solution to all these problems is to use manual mode with auto ISO. It means we can manually control the aperture and the shutter speed, and the camera will use the ISO, changing the ISO value to get to the right exposure. And why this is better than the camera deciding the shutter speed or the aperture? It's because the ISO is the only one of these 3 settings that is not affecting the look of the image. Of course, it's affecting the quality, the grain of the image, because if we go crazy high with the ISO, the image quality starts deteriorating quite a bit, but it's not affecting the depth of field or the sharpness of the image. So the way I would usually work is I set my aperture at the value I want for the look I want, that in wildlife a lot of time is as wide as I can go with that lens. In this case is f2. I will then set my shutter speed depending on the type of subject that I'm shooting. If it's a bird that can fly away, it might be 1/2000 or even more. If it's a static subject or a landscape, I can go low at 100 or less. Once I set these 2 values, I will let the camera decide the ISO value. I still have to keep an eye on the ISO that the camera is setting, because if I see that it goes too high or too low, I have to adjust the other 2 values. But this setting gives me the maximum flexibility and maximum control at the same time. As always, if you have any questions, leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.